They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking.
Hi, this is Nikolai, and you're listening to My Dad Rafal, co-host James Jardine, and featuring Mr. Jim Tiller on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Plug in, listen up, and enjoy.
Deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
Okie dokie. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to another edition of your favorite cybersecurity podcast, the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. This is Raph. I have James and Jim back in the saddle. I feel like I need that back in the saddle again in the background there. And Eva, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but I have you on mute because you had some echo. So when we kicked that off, it was kind of strange. But you should be good to go. Eva, go ahead and introduce yourself because it's a cool topic today.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm Eva Georgieva. I work currently as a cybersecurity automation engineer at Telefonica Germany. And I've been in this business for around 7 years, which is like insane to say because I feel like I've been working in cybersecurity for 20 plus years. Just because of them.
Imagine what those of us that have. Imagine what those of us that have been in it for 25 years plus feel like.
Oh my God, it was like such a long way to go. I feel like it's like the diverse roles that I had, the companies that I've been into size-wise as well. So I started in a startup and now it's a large corporate organization. So security problems evolve as well. But now I kind of get that job postings for cybersecurity roles that say 20 plus years of experience. I think that should be read like you feel like you had that, you've been through the stress.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I started out as a cybersecurity analyst on the defensive side. And then I've been quite lucky in that role because it was a startup and I got to experience many different, let's say, positions or tasks and learn what I like, what I don't like, what I'm good at, what I'm not really good at. And then I moved into pen testing and I worked as a pen tester for a few years. And now I'm in automation. But I feel like automation has been like a recurring role for me throughout all the roles because I was always this person that like hated if something was repeated. If I had to do something every Tuesday, it was already like something for me that I don't want to do anymore. God forbid every day. So I think it's quite a fit now. Even though I've been on kind of both sides, now I would say what I do is in the middle, even though maybe that's not on paper what people say about security automation. They say it's like a defensive role, a SOC role, but like I feel you kind of need to apply the mindset of, let's say, from an offensive perspective a lot if you want to develop like a good security automation. So I would say it's kind of in the middle. I'd say I take use of the skills I've acquired in the different roles. Yeah.
So you guys, if you're listening, I say I've always said. If you've got an interesting topic, hit me on LinkedIn or email or whatever other methods you have and propose a topic. This is a topic you've proposed and we're going to talk about it. I wanted to start off because you wanted to bring up automation, right, in security. And guys, James, we've talked about automation a bunch of times. And I feel like we never quite do it justice because there's so many angles, so many ways to approach this.
I was thinking that when she was actually going through the, offensive, defensive, where do we fall in what we're actually automating when we talk about it? Because there is so many different aspects you can look at it. Maybe there's a new angle of that, but I think that's why we never really get to a final, because there's so, do I do this part? Do I do that part? It just swings in all these different directions.
That's right. Eva, what's your let's start with kind of the macro, the big picture. When you look at automating for the purpose of security defense, right? When you look at automation, how do you feel like the last 7 years has gone for you? Like, are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Is the technology good, bad? What's your take?
Yeah, so, okay, because you said the big picture, I'll just start with the definition, like the general thing, like you using technology to do a proper security investigation in an automated way, right? Like that's what kind of should be. And now also it very much depends on the size of the organization and then how much thought you put into automation. So the level really makes a difference. But I think it has evolved, definitely. First, automation was kind of looked at as just automating the mundane tasks, like kind of getting rid of things. So
Right.
like you don't look at them anymore. First of all, I guess it was reporting. Security reporting is a big thing. Nobody likes it, everybody does it. And I think like that's usually the first thing you look at when you look at automating, like at any scale. Or you should maybe. But of course, like then it kind of moves on to, let's say, the different alerts. So you want to cut through the noise. You want to filter things out, and you want to help the analysts actually be more involved in the process without like being sucked into it. Without them like being completely looking at false positives. So that's like maybe the other side of automation. So I would say to answer it, it has definitely evolved, but it really also, the problems that you encounter really depend on the size. So every company and at its size has a different perspective on what issues they want to tackle and how automation then is put into the picture.
All right, that feels like a good place to take this then. Let's talk about company size. Let's talk about security organization size, because company size, large companies can still have tiny security teams. Been there. Let's talk about what role automation plays in the size of the organization. You talked about, you started with report. We started with reporting, right? Like that's kind of where, let's automate the mundane tasks.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the industry over the last 10 years has figured out how to automate the mundane tasks? And I think more importantly, did we automate the right ones, or are we automating the right ones?
We're trying. We're definitely trying. It's very important from where you start from. That's what I think. Like, for example, from what I've learned through my journey in automation is that everything that you give to automation, it amplifies it. So you cannot say, I don't know what to do with this, let's automate it. Because you kind of speed up the mess.
That's right. I love that. That's a great quote. That's a great quote.
That's a good
kind of
one.
Speed up the mess. I love that.
That's a good one. That's very, very good.
Yeah. It's usually what happens. So it kind of really starts with your SOC processes and really identifying the pain points. And that's usually what I like to ask, like, why do you need automation? I'm really not this person that is like, sure, let's automate this. It's going to be great. And then promise something. And then it's like, just in the loop, nobody maintains it, nobody looks at it, and it kind of evolves over time, and then it's not relevant anymore. So you kind of need to understand the problem that you're resolving, so you cannot start from chaos. That's maybe one good, let's say, way to view it. Yeah.
I think that's something we've mentioned a few times too, is in order to automate, you have to understand what it is that you're automating. I mean, I think you laid that out really well, Eva, and that, you just can't, it does. It just speeds up the chaos if you don't know what you're doing. You have to understand it. I think that's where a lot of places struggle, is I think too many places don't understand their part, right? Like they're doing stuff day to day, but they don't really understand the processes that are happening, that if you said, hey, can you automate that? I don't know if they'd know where to start.
Yeah, absolutely. It happens all the time. Like also the involvement of the teams, right? Like usually can be the case that you just Like everything happens, the requirements are laid out, the logs are ingested in CM, the detection is done, and suddenly you arrive at the automation engineer and just tell them, oh, now only the playbook is left, or only the automation is left. And that is where most of the times it also fails, because like you fail to involve the engineering part, also the analyst viewpoint from the very beginning. So now you are lacking those perspectives and you're thinking that you can get something out of your automation that you maybe realistically cannot. So that also happens, let's say, quite often.
So if I may ask, so I've been in meetings where people are like, we need to do this process. And then 80% of the meeting becomes how we're going to automate it, right? You know what I mean? It's like, before I even know, to James's point of course, I'm really curious about your view on when you look at it, when you first approach, somebody goes, I think we need to automate this, right? What is that cutoff point for you? Do you have one? Is there a method that you follow that says, this is not a good process to automate? You know, I mean, I'd rather, instead of automating, when do you say no? Like there's just not enough. You need to run this process for 6 months. If you haven't run it for 6 months, it's not ready for automation. Do you have like a gatekeeper that you practice?
Yeah, definitely. Usually a very good question to ask, I would say, is there like a metric that you want to, let's say, improve in your already established process? Like, do you want this to be more efficient? Do you want this alert to arrive faster from A to B because right now it takes you 3 hours? Like, what do you need the automation for? And then if I don't get an answer to this, usually the pull is that maybe it's not the best use case to automate. Maybe you need to refine the process. And usually I'm like super glad to help because but it's not an automation use. It might not be an automation use case. So there needs to be a metric, I would say. You need to know exactly what you want to improve, because at the end, with automation, you usually want to improve something. Speed it up, I don't know, respond faster, move the load somewhere else, anything. So if you cannot like pinpoint that is what I want to do, not an automation case.
I like that, because there are no shortage of things that I can think of as I'm thinking through some of the workflows I've lived in the past that get automated for the sake of automation. And then so let me outline, let me think of one real quick that I can make a fairly good articulation on. So the one we've been using lately, right? So every alert that comes in that's valid, or that's of some scoring methodology, base methodology, some score, high, medium, low, whatever. The analysts would do some investigation on it. We'll say, add context and all that. And there was a SOC that I worked with that said, well, then we could everybody, we do this every time. Why don't we just automate this? And the problem that we ended up was because that process wasn't well defined. Because for an email, you collect some enrichment data over here and some over here. For a file, you collect different enrichment data to try to make that case more solid. And so the way, like, as they were trying to, because there was no metric they were trying to hit. Like, let's do it. It was just better, right? And better isn't a metric. There's not a way to measure. You can't say, oh, is it better now? Right? Like, yes, it's better, but it's better by 20%. Like, what does that mean? And so what they ended up doing is they created this thing that would just go pull a lot of data, and some of it was completely useless. And it just took up a bunch of CPU cycles and did really nothing great. And the analysts had to go then like throw a bunch of data away and essentially redo that process, but mentally. So then they scrapped it and they came back and said, okay, this didn't work. What are we trying to improve? And the answer was, we're trying to improve. And they took one of those, like, hey, if a file comes in, like, okay, that I can automate, because then I know I can go get the file hash and get original IPs. I can do some sandboxing. That I can do. And then they said, oh, I'd like to get the base level of data and the sandboxing stuff done faster. So we could automate that, right? Because the human would have to drop in the sandbox, test it out. But trying to get a kind of a general make it better process almost always fails. Because I love that you said if it doesn't have a defined metric, it just triggered so much PTSD in my head, because there's always like, hey, you guys need to improve that, right? And it's like, well, how do you improve it? Well, it's gotta go faster. It's gotta have less errors in it. I'm like, okay, but those are some seriously ubiquitous things. Like, those are some cloudy metrics. How do I make it? What is better? How does better work?
Yeah, exactly. It really happens too often. But also, I would say not to only blame the other side. Sometimes even the automation engineering doesn't have, let's say, a proper framework, and you can easily fall into the loop, especially if it's like a lot of data, and now you also don't want to get overwhelmed with all the different alerts that are arriving. So now you just want to, okay, let's develop some automations so we can close this faster, so our analysts can focus on something that really matters. But I think just striking the right balance and like achieving that level when you can actually follow a process that can be tested and can be executed through, let's say, a month or two, and then say, okay, this is now a good automation, let's implement it.
Where do you find in an organization, let's take the Security Operations Center that we all hate the name of, but that's what it is for now. You walk into a brand new organization, they do everything manually. How do you determine what to automate first? What's the most important things to automate in your mind?
That's a very good question. So I would say still start small, and then see exactly, like, talk a lot with the analysts. I know usually when you enter a new organization, there's always someone at an upper management that decided how things need to be done. But I feel like understanding the pain points for the analysts, because they are usually doing the investigation and looking at the use cases. So understanding what their issues is, you kind of need to start from there. So it can be a lot of different things. It can even be reporting. It might be that you take, I don't know, 15 hours, if nothing is automated, just to write reports. But most of the times is alerts. And then you kind of need to start with filtering, like defining use cases. Okay, this is what are personal for the organization. And then going from there. So maybe closing first informational and low alerts and just focusing on the ones that are more critical, so you can just kind of filter out, and then gradually all the rest kind of implement them. So that kind of will, let's say, reduce the noise. Of course, that's it. If there's a tool already there, if there's not a tool, you kind of first need to understand what tool can do the job for you. Is it like a SOAR tool, or maybe SOAR tool will not help? If it's, let's say, if everything is on the cloud, sometimes there can be a debate whether maybe like an in-house SOAR tool can actually solve those kind of alerts that are maybe you're pulling all from AWS. Because that can be also a long road that those alerts travel, and then how do you want to get alerted on them? Maybe it's better if you get alerted natively within the cloud platform. So like kind of getting around the automation there and the issue that you're solving. So starting maybe with those kind of questions.
The entire time you're talking, Eva, is all I can think about is what a slippery slope of a world you must live in, right? I mean, listen, I mean, you guys, James and Rob, you got to agree. It's like, as she's walking through this, it's like all of a sudden I would think it's like you're faced with all these different tools, all these different things, different levels of maturity, all these different processes, and people are going, automate this, make it better, you know? And I'm just thinking, man, at some point that's why I'm just trying to figure out, is like, I think a little bit where you're going, Ralph, with your question is like, just where to begin even, I think is a monumental task. And then you have to, do it. Right. Yeah. I just think it's absolutely mind blowing that you're able to be successful, because I can see you just getting pulled into these huge cavernous issues that, the process of actually making the automation do, what you want it to do is like way at the tail end of all this giant dragon you're having to eat. I find it fascinating.
What does it look like starting out? I mean, kind of the point, even before picking what am I going to automate, how am I going to automate this? Because a lot of times, like when I think of automation, I think of writing scripts, right? Calling APIs, doing all that stuff. But, you mentioned SOAR, you mentioned other things. How much automation is being done just by drag and drop within certain tools to be able to automate processes versus having to step back and write Python scripts or, other type of actual development work to automate tasks?
Well, I don't know if I wouldn't say 50-50 because it really depends on the load of the data that you have. But usually there's no tool that you can purchase and that it's gonna be, there you go, it works for your organization. So you're gonna have to do still until you get it to a point that you're happy with it and that you're like, okay, now we can integrate this, integrate that. And you're like, it does the job for us. Because all of these tools, most of them, few of them actually do a good job, but you still need to do a lot of customization. So it takes a lot of time, 6 months to a year, that when you start out and you just, let's say, purchase the new tool to say, okay, now we can improve. Like you're first balancing out, you're first getting to a level where you feel not overwhelmed. And then actually, you can see the automation shine.
Is a lot of that happening in those tools? Like I know for me, like we do automation and, a lot of what we do is actually, it's just Python scripts that, call in. Like I don't like logging into most of the tools that we have. So I create scripts that go get me the information I need and I run it from the command line and I get it, right? Or we want alerts on, hey, let me know if there's any new criticals or highs that came out today, throw it in our channel, right? Very simplistic automations, but stuff like that. But it's all done through like Python scripts versus, I know some of these tools have the ability to add like scripting inside or, kind of build automations inside of the tool itself.
Yeah. If you use a SOAR tool, it's a lot of the automation is already, let's say, pre-written for you. You just need to kind of find the right use cases. And let's say they've been tailored, such as, let's say, the big playbooks, the big automations are in a sense for phishing, malware. So you kind of can use those scripts, maybe need some tweaking. It can be the case, happens that you need to also write something from scratch. And it's good that all these tools support different languages. But yeah, if you're using such a tool on that scale, it is made easier. It is made that you don't have to write everything on your own.
I'm interested in your opinion because you've done several of these, right? What's the most difficult thing within the things that you've been asked to automate? What's the most difficult thing to automate? What process is the most difficult to automate, or like what is? And when I say difficult to automate, I mean like difficult to get a good result out of.
Yeah, it is still the one that doesn't have a proper requirements for. It's always that one. If I sit on a call and the team that wants to get something automated doesn't really know what they want, even if you manage to find a template and then you do it, because once you have the steps drawn in front of you, the automation is the easy part, but then you get back to them and then it's like always someone in the back that has all these questions, and then if you don't have an answer for them, you can see this is a very tough project, because not have an answer, but usually they have, let's say, a hard time understanding what you've done, and it's not their fault, but it's also not your fault. So it's kind of lost in the chaos, in the requirements, and they start receiving something, and you've warned about the noise, but maybe now they were not aware, and now there is a lot of noise. Let's say someone wants to receive something on their email, and you tell them, but this is going to be quite noisy, and they start receiving 50 emails per day where they need to say, yes, this is, they need to click maybe on the email. And that becomes a problem. So it's always the one that is really not defined when you're not solving an issue. And then you have to deal, because it becomes a long process, and sometimes it can become a waste of time. You've done something, but they didn't understand it correctly, and now you have to redo everything and start from scratch.
Makes sense. What's the specifically in terms of pieces of technology, what's the most frustrating, and I don't call any vendors out because we don't want to do that, but what's the most frustrating piece of tech in the SOC to use, or in the security automation, in the process of automating security operations? How's that? What's the most frustrating piece of tech that you have to work with?
I think it's the SOAR tool.
Are there any ones that you like particularly to use from a vendor perspective? If you have a favorite vendor, like, do you have one that you like, that, I don't want to say which ones you hate, but like any one that works best if they have it in place?
I won't mention any vendors, but usually the well-established ones, the big ones, they're more customizable. It doesn't necessarily mean it's better all the time, but they're more customizable, so you can actually do more things on your own. Whereas if it's a smaller one, then it's like harder to do that. But yeah, it's definitely a love-hate relationship for me, just because of the fact that it's tailored to large audiences, different types of organization, different problems. And then when you have to implement it in your organization, there needs to be a lot of customization.
How often do you
Oh, go ahead.
How often do you see where, because I think this kind of piggybacks off of that, they make changes to their tools and it breaks all your automations? Like, is that, like, do you struggle with that, or is that not as prevalent as one might think?
Yeah, actually, yeah, that doesn't happen quite often. What can happen is, let's say there has been an update and you haven't been notified about, and now something doesn't work. But usually that's like easy to fix. You kind of need to do the update. You might overlook it. You might not see that it happened, and then you struggle for an hour and say, okay, what happened? But then, yeah, you go back. It's an update.
That actually leads me to a question: is what would be, and I don't want to paint you into a corner here, but what is the lifespan of automation? Like, when do you get to a point where the environment changes, where there's critical aspects that you just go, okay, it's a redo? I mean, have you run into that yet?
Of course, many times. So first of all, it starts with accountability. So when you do any automation, I think it's very important that someone maintains it. And I don't mean automation engineer. I mean, usually the people that requested it, they need to know, is it still serving their purpose? Like, now we're going back to the metrics, but that is why it's important, if it's still efficient, right? I would say there needs to be regular check-ins on any, let's say, large automations that are part of any project. So to say, okay, we're here, we're there. Do we need to refine something? Do we need to keep it status quo, or do we do not need this anymore? Maybe a new tool has been adopted, and now this process is too long, so you don't need that automation anymore. So here, and this is something that usually falls on the, let's say, SOC team, on the automation engineering team. Like, it's our responsibility to keep track of that, but you cannot keep track of that, especially if you have like tons of automation. So it has to be like a responsibility on the other side, because you requested it and you know if that's still useful to you, and if it improves any of the metrics that you set, it will.
That's a significant statement, right? I mean, because if you're going to invest in the time and energy in automation, you have to make sure it stays relevant. You know, like one, it has to continue to function, right? To James's point, relevant to what the targets you're trying to do. Because, you know, I mean, think about, you said something earlier, it's like, you know, about ownership and accountability. And there's a lot of times when people higher up the food chain may think they know what's really happening, but it's the people that are doing that know. And so they may make a change and they just wipe out, you know, this huge swath of their automation they spent, you know, a bunch of work doing. And there's somebody not there acting as a sponsor, you know, a primary point of contact. Right? Do you find that a lot of organizations are making like people investments in relative to automation? It sounds totally ironic, right? Automation means make, you know, but do you feel that there are people or organizations are looking and say, okay, this is my automation team?
Well, you said it right. It is an investment, but still, when you look at automation, it's super rare that you find like that all processes are automated fully, completely, that you never need an input from an analyst, from someone that accepts the risk, from an incident manager. So you always need people involved in the process. And it's a balance if you want the automation to work, because you have to account like, okay, maybe you need to do one check-in in 3 months just to measure the metrics, but then the time that it saves, it's like quantifiable. You know how many man days you saved by doing the automation. So it's I don't think we're at that level that we can say completely hands off. That is not our business anymore. It's still your business, but now you're kind of more involved in other processes that are more important, and this does the heavy lifting for you. But still, you need to stay involved in order for the automation to still be relevant after some time.
I think tied into that, Jim, a little bit too is, you know, automation, some of it is to remove the noise and remove things, right? Like I don't have to think about it anymore, right? I kind of set and forget. And I've seen this before where you've got automations that go out like, hey, I know my scanner is going to scan every night. And if it finds something, it'll tell me. And you're like, great. So if it doesn't tell me, it didn't find anything, right? Or it didn't tell me anything because it's not scanning, right? And so having that responsible party to be able to say, hey, you know, it's easy with reports, right? Like I either got the report or I didn't. And hopefully the person's reading the reports, they see that and they're like, hey, I didn't get my report today. What's going on with automation? But think of how many things are automated in the background that if somebody didn't think about it, you'd have no idea it's not actually doing its job. You just assume that it's doing it, right? But you're not looking there anymore for that. So another aspect, I think, of that maintenance part of it, of making sure that, hey, we have to check on this to make sure it actually still is working like we thought it was.
100%.
Can I ask? So we're about out of time. I want to ask you kind of the lead out question that I think I'll give you a couple minutes to you know put some thought into. But you've been doing this for a bit, right? We've the process, both mental and technology, of automating has come a long way. We can from you know Perl scripts back when dinosaurs, Bash scripts and Perl scripts. Back when the three of us probably started. Jim, I think dinosaurs were writing Perl scripts back then. That's funny. Or PHP, worse. James's favorite language. But we had, yeah, but we had things that were very rudimentary. We quickly saw the industry talk about like drag and drop, right? Like low code, no code automation. That both excited and scared the hell out of me. And so we've been on this sort of trajectory, I think. What do you see? As we get down the line further, the next 2-3 years, what are we going to be focusing on? What's the outlook on technology that you think, and what should we be looking at?
Yeah. So the next thing would definitely be, and I hate to say this, but AI.
Oh, she said
I was so proud of myself. I didn't bring it up. Yeah, I win. I didn't bring it up.
I feel
sorry,
the
guys.
same way. I didn't want to, but it's really inevitable. I think we are a long way from there, to be honest. But I still think we shouldn't walk till there. We should run. You should already have a test lab. You should see what people are doing. For example, it's always like this. On the defensive side, we're much more scared to use anything new, like rather than on the offense, right? Like there, they try out, there's POCs, everything happens very fast, and then our side usually says, yeah, let's sit on this, let's see how it evolves. I think we should put some thought into it. Test, see how, let's say, maybe start with Gen IE and then agentic and so on and so forth. And I know it's a hard process, especially on our side, but still, I think it's a good time to take a look at it and see how our side can fight, because there's been a lot going on the other side. But
okay, so I lied. That's not the last question. Then since you said AI, I'm going to ask: Do you feel like the state of AI, large language models, machine learning, that we're at right now, is it enough to provide real value into the cybersecurity defensive side? Is there enough there, or is it just something that we're in a lab testing and playing with, but not really relying on?
I've recently read a very, very good research paper on this, and they have been testing different agents that are trying to automate the process of pen testing, right? And there has been several metrics and how these different agents did against machines from Hack the Box, Try Hack Me, so on and so forth. And the results are not very impressive yet. However, some of those agents, most of them paid, not open source, maybe, but they can execute the scenario from the beginning until the end. So that kind of means something. That means that the other side should also look, okay, now how can the counter measure of this be? Even though it's not maybe the best yet, maybe it'll bump into a defense that it does, and then it doesn't know where to go. But it is a start. So.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I know it's late where you are, and we appreciate your time. These are my favorite types of conversations where somebody submits like, "Hey, you guys should talk about this," and we get to include somebody that listens. Have you been listening to us for long?
Yeah, I have been actually. I'm quite into podcasts, so I bumped into yours.
Awesome. Thank you for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's a topic that's important. It's a topic that's growing, and James, Jim, I think you guys will agree. It's not going anywhere. Scale matters, especially as we get bigger and bigger and bigger in terms of data pools. So automation has to be the future. How that looks, I'm not convinced I know. I'm not convinced the experts know. And I'm pretty sure that the automation tools people don't know. So on that note, Eva, thank you so much for submitting this. Thank you so much for joining us. Folks, thanks for listening. This has been another episode of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. More goodness coming at you down the pipe. And I'll get you more good guests, good hosts, and good times. We'll talk to you guys another time, another place on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Ciao, y'all.